thank you all for joining the first session of the Alternative Fuels and Technologies Working Group. We are excited to be launching this working group for stakeholders for both the Building Energy Performance Standards, also known as BEPS, and the Clean Heat Rules. And so if you're seeing some unfamiliar names or maybe unfamiliar faces, that's the reason. Thank you all for joining. And today we'll be talking about the different building decarbonization efforts introduced by the Maryland Department of the Environment and their interaction with alternative fuels and technologies. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce some of our team that's on the call. A familiar face I'm sure you all have probably seen before, Dr. Zach Brazola, also known as Dr. Decarb, section head of the building decarbonization team. There he is, just popped on. Go ahead and say hey. There he is.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today.
All right. And so that was Dr. Decarb. We've also got Cameron Arnstein, policy analyst for the climate change program at MDE, who is coordinating outreach for the Clean Heat Rules. There's Cameron.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Cameron. And so if you haven't seen me before, I primarily work on the Building Energy Performance Standards program. But for today, I'll kick us off with some background information on the department's decarbonization policies. I'll go into an overview of BEPS, and then I'll hand it over to Zach to walk you through clean heat rules and alternative fuels. Just as I said, this session will be recorded and uploaded to the Maryland Department of the Environment's BEPS YouTube playlist and also the Clean Heat Rules YouTube playlist. So a lot of content to watch and get caught up on things. We will share a link to the slides for today in the description of each video after it is posted to those playlists. If you've joined one of our working groups or webinars before, either for BEPS or the Clean Heat Rules, you might know how we run it. The chat is currently disabled. If you have questions, there is a Q&A feature built into Google. You can access it via the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The button looks like a circle, triangle, square. Go ahead and click on that, and it'll show you how to get to the Q&A. So if you've got questions about the content as we're talking about it, you can submit your questions in there. And we'll work to address those questions submitted towards the end of the session today as time allows. And additionally, as time allows, we'd also like to open this session up for discussion near the end. And for this discussion portion, you'll just need to raise your hand virtually. There's a little button at the bottom banner of the screen. Looks like a little hand. You click that. And so if you want to speak during the discussion portion, click that button and we'll call on folks in the order that the hands are raised. And you'll be able to come off mute and share any thoughts for that discussion portion. So if you'd like to speak during that portion, we'd ask everyone to keep their comments to about 2 minutes, just being cognizant of time. And if you don't want to come off mute and speak, totally fine. We'll also be releasing a feedback form today, so you can provide your thoughts in there as well, and that will facilitate future discussion throughout the working group. So I just blabbed a lot, so let's go ahead and get started. Why are we all here? We are here to create a consistent, scientifically based assessment of the life cycle emissions impacts of alternative fuels and technologies to apply to Maryland's building decarbonization policies. And we are also here to solicit stakeholder input to inform the development of this framework. So this stakeholder input portion of this working group is crucial. And so we really would appreciate everyone's, if you've got feedback, if you've got thoughts on the content throughout this working group, we'd appreciate your input on all of that. So agenda for this session 1 of the working group. We're going to talk briefly about Maryland's emissions reduction requirements and the plan to get there. And then I'll give a 10-minute overview of the building energy performance standards if you're maybe coming from the clean heat rules realm. And then if you're coming from the BEPS realm, Zach's going to talk about the clean heat rules and alternative fuels, which is surprisingly fun to say. And if you need more details than what we talk about today, there's some QR codes up on the screen. Left one's going to take you to the BEPS website. Right one's going to take you to the Clean Heat Rules website. On those websites, you can, and Cameron's dropping the links in the chat. Thank you for that. And on those websites, you can find everything you need to know, resources, links to sign up for email lists, links to get to the YouTube playlists, and so on. But those are great places to start if you want to dive in further. So getting started with the content, Maryland's climate plan. The state has set requirements to achieve a 60% reduction in emissions by 2031 and to achieve net zero by 2045. And those requirements are compared to 2006 levels. And so as a part of those requirements that the state has set, Maryland Department of the Environment was required to develop a plan to achieve these emissions reductions. And so if you haven't read the plan, it is available today on MDE's website. It talks about a whole suite of policies that the state is working on to achieve these aggressive climate goals. So go ahead and read that plan today. Specifically, we're talking buildings today, and in the building sector, to hit net zero, again, net zero by 2045, there needs to be a 90% emission reduction from the sector. And so MDE is implementing BEPS, Building Energy Performance Standards, and the Clean Heat Rules to help achieve these statutory emissions reduction requirements. And additionally, the department, through all of this implementation, is required to create net economic benefits for Marylanders. So that's the plan. And as I said, two crucial parts of the plan, BEPS and Clean Heat Rules. I'm going to talk about BEPS. Zach will talk about Clean Heat Rules. So BEPS, what's the goal? What's it doing? What is it doing in one sentence? It's aiming to reduce the on-site emissions and improve the energy efficiency of Maryland's large buildings. So today I'm going to do a 10-minute overview of the program that is now in effect. BEPS was adopted on December 23rd of last year, 2024. And the program, as I just said, aims to reduce emissions from Maryland's large building sector to assist in meeting those state emissions requirements that I just talked about. It also aims to reduce energy costs for Maryland's building owners and also improve indoor and outdoor air quality for Marylanders. Who does BEPS apply to? So I said large buildings. These are buildings greater, 35,000 square feet or greater. You can think of your average grocery store lands around 40,000 square feet. So that might give you a good frame of reference. We call these buildings that are greater than 35,000 square feet covered buildings. And so first part of the requirements for BEPS, covered buildings must annually submit a benchmarking report to MDE starting this year, 2025. What's a benchmarking report? It's an aggregation of the energy use data on site at the building. They aggregate that, put it in a report for us in a tool called Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and they submit that to NDE. These first reports are due this year, September 1st, 2025. That's for calendar year 2024 energy use data. Now, these reports are due by June 1st every year thereafter, but this is the first year requirements, so there's you can get reports in by September 1st and they will be considered timely. So 5 years down the road, building owners are just going to be benchmarking for 5 years, and then starting in 2030, these covered buildings will need to start meeting phased emission standards in 2030 or pay for their excess emissions. So what do these buildings look like around the state? Well, we model that there's over 9,000 in the buildings in the state that are going to have to comply with BEPS. And so when you're driving around, what do they kind of look like? Well, the majority of them are warehouses, office spaces, multifamily housing, and retail stores. Where are these buildings located? Well, they are absolutely everywhere. They're in every county in Maryland, but they, as you can see on the map, predominantly clustered between Baltimore and DC along that I-95 corridor. So does every building over 35,000 square feet need to comply with BEPS? No, there are certain exemptions. There are certain property types that can apply to be totally exempt from the BEPS requirements. So follow me through this big picture on the screen. On the left-hand side, properties designated as historic by local, state, or federal law can apply for total exemption. Public and non-public elementary and secondary schools, manufacturing buildings, agricultural buildings, demolished buildings, and also buildings owned by the federal government. They can all apply to be exempted totally from BEPS. And on the right side of the screen, we also have some flexibilities for providers of affordable housing and naturally occurring affordable housing, and for buildings experiencing low or no occupancy or financial distress. So how do these, let's say you're a building owner you own a building that's a covered building under BEPS. How do you get started? Well, first things first, I said those first benchmarking reports are due this year, September 1st, 2025. So the building owners are going to use Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's a free tool online to track their annual energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. Again, BEPS is aiming to reduce emissions from Maryland's large building sector. And once they start benchmarking, they're going to be able to see how their buildings are performing based off the data that's being fed into the tool. And from there, they can start to assess how their buildings are performing compared to the standards, which you can view today in the regulation. So annually, starting this year, they're going to be able to assess their building's performance. And then 5 years down the road, I mentioned those emissions standards are going to start to come into play, and buildings can either achieve the standards or achieve partial compliance and make that alternative compliance payment for the excess emissions. So a little more deeper into the standards, what exactly do they look like? We like to say that building owners have a long runway. So there's 5 years where you're just submitting benchmarking data or benchmarking reports to MDE. And then in 2030, those emission standards come in. Well, it's going to look like a phased reduction of on-site direct emissions from the type of building. Again, we're guiding buildings to net zero to assist in meeting the state's GHG reduction requirements. So 2030 to 2034, interim standard 1, that's going to be the highest allotment of emissions per property type, like an office space or a multifamily space. Interim standard 2, 2035 to 2039, that emissions allotment is going to tighten. And then the final standard is going to come into play in 2040 and beyond, and that is net zero direct emissions from the building. We model that roughly a third of the covered building stock in the state is already meeting the final standard of net zero. So from the site of the building. So it's possible that when building owners start to benchmark, they're going to already be in compliance with that final standard, or maybe they're already in compliance with interim standard 2 or interim standard 1. And so that runway to compliance lengthens. Additionally, as building owners are assessing their performance, our MDE intends to adopt an energy efficiency standard called Site Energy Use Intensity in 2027. And so in the meantime, as building owners are assessing their performance and maybe making upgrades, we recommend not installing inefficient electric equipment. And so just last piece here on BEPS, we are hosting a suite of informational sessions, working groups, as well as office hours to assist in the implementation of the program and to provide resources and responses to stakeholders regarding their specific situations. And so if maybe you're coming from the clean heat rules side of this and you want to learn more about BEPS, please go to the BEPS website. You can get on our YouTube playlist. watch over almost 20 hours of content on that playlist available today. You can also sign up for our email list to get updates on other working groups and offerings that the BEPS program is offering. So thank you all for listening for that. And with that, I will now pass it over to Dr. Zach Brizola, Dr. Decarb, to walk you through the clean heat rules. Take it away, Zach.
Thanks, Sam, and welcome everyone. Again, let's dive into clean heat. So for those of you coming from the BEPS side that have not heard about clean heat before, there's two different policies under the clean heat rules, the clean heat standard and the zero emissions heating equipment standard. The core goal here is that we want to reduce air pollution. I mean, and this applies to BEPS as well, but as we think more and more about kind of the rest of the buildings in the state, we want to reduce air pollution from burning fossil fuels in buildings, improve public health, mitigate climate change, and lower energy costs. And a fact that many of you may not know is that fuel burning equipment in buildings produce over 3 times more nitrogen oxide emissions than emissions from power plants. So we've done a really good job at reducing the emissions from power plants, but now all of the combustion in buildings is leading to a lot of NOx emissions in our communities. And these have substantial health impacts, many respiratory impacts, wheezing and cough, asthma, COPD, lung cancer, as well as things like premature death and metabolic disorders and preterm births. So there's a lot of health impacts in addition to our climate requirements that we are thinking about because we're required to reduce criteria pollutants to meet increasingly stringent air quality standards and protect the public health. So that brings us to the first policy, which is the zero emissions heating equipment standard. It establishes emission limits on residential scale space heating and water heating equipment and helps people save money. ZHES is similar to emission standards for cars and trucks in that it sets emission standards for furnaces, boilers, and water heaters at the residential scale, and really focuses on the emissions from these 3 types of equipment. So when would this actually take effect? Our goal is that as we look in the climate plan, is that almost all newly installed residential scale heating equipment in Maryland would meet zero emission standards beginning in 2029. So ideally, to achieve this, most new air conditioning units would be heat pumps starting as soon as possible. Furnaces and boilers would be gradually replaced because zero emission heating equipment is focused on new equipment, not existing equipment. Would gradually replaced with heat pumps, and combustion water heaters would be replaced with zero emission options, especially heat pumps, as they reach the end of their life throughout the 2030s and 2040s. And people can keep existing furnaces and boilers for backup heating. Again, there's no requirements on existing equipment. And all this does is set emissions limits on those pieces of equipment that we're focusing on, but the kind of preferred policy solution in many of these cases is heat pumps. The challenges are many in actually achieving this goal. And so we're actually currently in a feedback taking mode on ZHES, thinking about flexibilities and other pathways to still be moving in the right direction and meeting this goal while reflecting the realities here on the ground in Maryland. So I encourage you, if you're just hearing about this for the first time, but you have some thoughts, feel free to email us at cleanheat.mde@maryland.gov. Where we're taking a lot of feedback right now, and we obviously want to hear from you all on flexibilities. So that's ZHES in a nutshell. And just so, again, level setting, zero emission equipment like electric water heaters and heat pumps are already some of the best selling heating systems in Maryland. And they're also some of the best selling heating systems in states that are a lot colder than Maryland, like Maine. There's been huge uptake of heat pumps in Maine and in countries even colder, like in Norway, for example. And they work really well at cold temperatures, actually. The last about 10, 15 years of new generation high efficiency equipment are very effective in cold temperatures. And what we're finding is that heat pumps can actually provide the lowest heating and cooling costs and can have the lowest installation costs. So on average, Marylanders who use a heat pump for space heating and cooling see annual energy cost savings of about $375 versus gas. If they've got gas as their kind of comparison. If they're on oil, propane, or electric resistance, they're saving somewhere between $1,300 and $1,400. So big cost savings potential, especially against the oil, propane, and electric resistance. And with incentives, it can be less expensive to install a heat pump than other heating and cooling systems. Heat pump water heaters cost less to install and operate than other water heating systems. And Marylanders who use heat pump water heating systems, no matter what fuel they're coming from, can save over $300 annually. And with incentives, it can be less expensive to install a heat pump water heater than others types of water heaters. The Clean Heat Standard is the second policy that we're developing right now. Anyway, so that wrapped up. I'm charging right through really quickly because we want to get to the meat of the discussion, but that kind of wraps up the goals of the zero emission heating equipment standard. It's an emissions-based standard for equipment, and it's focused more on the residential scale and phasing in at the end of the decade. And we're currently taking a lot of feedback on that. Now, on the Clean Heat Standard, so this second policy, the whole goal of the Clean Heat Standard is to create additional incentives to help building owners transition to clean heat solutions. It encourages heating fuel providers to become clean heat providers by requiring them to help their customers adopt clean heat solutions such as heat pumps or alternative fuels. And customers who adopt those clean heat solutions earn clean heat credits, which are valuable for that heating fuel provider to meet its obligations. So it thus creates additional incentives for customers to adopt heat pumps or alternative fuels, these clean heat solutions. There are many different things that can earn clean heat credits, and these are actions that many are familiar with today in the building space, putting insulation in the walls, your attic, your floors, or doing air sealing, so typical weatherization work. Installing a whole suite of zero emission heating equipment, all of those things can generate clean heat credits. So heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, solar thermal, geothermal, all these different things can provide clean heat credits. As well as alternative fuels, biofuels, hydrogen, kind of the types of alternative fuels that when emissions reductions are created, can generate clean heat credits. So how do we address equity in clean heat? It's a core goal of what we're doing. The Clean Heat Standard ensures that low and moderate income households benefit from clean heat services by requiring heating fuel providers to provide an appropriate amount of clean heat services in low and moderate income households. And it's supporting projects like weatherization and heat pumps that reduce household energy costs. So when would this actually take effect? Heating fuel providers would begin reporting fuel delivery data to MDE next year in 2026. And heating fuel providers would then be obligated to offer additional incentives and help their customers adopt clean heat solutions and earn the clean heat credits from doing that to meet their obligations starting in 2027. And what we're really talking about here today is focusing on this discussion of what those clean heat credits are, especially for alternative fuels. And that's what this working group is all about, is how do we value the emissions reductions from alternative fuels. For installed measures like heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and insulation, we have a long history of valuing those measures, and including now in Empower, we value the greenhouse gas emission reductions of those measures. So we kind of know how to do that for installed measures, but we're really starting to think now about those alternative fuels that traditionally have not been valued the same way. So how do these all fit together? If you're familiar with Empower, it's the ratepayer-funded energy efficiency and now greenhouse gas reduction program. It reduces electricity and fossil fuel use in most buildings, but it excludes small utilities and delivered fuel providers. The Clean Heat Standard that we're working on reduces fossil fuel use in all buildings. It excludes, but some other places, so that's where we're focused on is all buildings generally, but excluding manufacturing. BEPS, the Building Energy Performance Standards, focuses on large buildings in the state and reducing electricity and fossil fuel use. And the Zero Emission Heating Equipment Standard is focused on small residential scale heating equipment. So generally doesn't overlap with BEPS, although there can be edge cases in a multifamily building, for example. And so these are kind of how they all fit. And one of the key things, as I said, is how we get to get all these pieces to work together. And the key thing to note, Empower exists today, but Empower is not going to reduce emissions fast enough to achieve the state's emissions reduction requirements that Sam talked about. We're not going to get to 90% reduction in the building sector by 2045 without all of these programs working together to achieve the state's required emissions reductions. So that gets me into how we value the clean heat credits, those alternative fuels. The approach is called life cycle emissions analysis. And at a super high level, if you've never heard of it before, the idea is if you grow an agricultural crop like a soybean and you harvest that and then you send it to a biorefinery where they turn that into a liquid fuel, and then that fuel is then provided to your building where that building combusts it. You're releasing direct emissions from the combustion of that fuel still, right? At the site, there are direct emissions from that fuel being combusted. In most cases, the combustion of an alternative fuel, not all of them, but many of them, it looks the same as combustion of a fossil fuel. But because when those agricultural products were grown in the first place, they've sequestered carbon, there are life cycle emissions benefits to this whole system. And there's many different pathways in agricultural products. And along this pathway here, there is energy into the transportation, into the refining process. All of these factors are kind of affecting, what is the whole life cycle of that fuel being burned. And so what this analysis is all about is figuring out and writing down for different types of fuels and different pathways, what are the life cycle emissions life cycle emissions of that fuel. And so Argonne National Lab, which is a Department of Energy lab, has done a lot of work in this field for the last over 25 years, and they've developed a model called GREET, which is specifically designed for doing this kind of life cycle emissions assessment of fuels. And it can be used in the transportation sector, in the heating sector, and it is a widely accepted tool for doing these kinds of calculations. And so that's our starting point for this working group, is that we're going to go and look at GREET and see what it says for different pathways of fuels. But then we know that there's different adjustments and different things to consider as we're looking at this. And so the whole purpose of this working group is to have these conversations about what we need to consider as we're doing it and what are we evaluating in this life cycle emissions model. And so I just want to show you, to kind of put this into context, what did we actually get out of this? Right. So I said a nice thing with my nice little diagram of the farm and the crops and burning it in your buildings. But what does it mean? Well, if you look here, here's a good one. Here's diesel fuel right here. It has a carbon intensity of 100 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. That is the kind of a baseline space to be looking at. And diesel fuel is diesel fuel. Now, what we want to do is now figure out alternative fuels, and they can range very widely. And so things like biodiesel could be the same, if not, if you look over here, this biodiesel is basically the same, if not a little more carbon intensive than that diesel itself. But over here, B100, so 100% biodiesel from used cooking oil, is down here at an 80+% reduction, if not 90% plus reduction in carbon intensity from a standard biodiesel. And so that is life cycle emissions reductions by burning that B100 biodiesel from used cooking oil versus a different pathway. And this is an example from Oregon because this is analysis been carried out in many different states for different purposes, but we're starting to dive into it here. And the other thing it's important to highlight here, electricity is included here. So, and that really ranges the gamut as well. Some states, like here in Vermont, here's an example in Vermont, where they're really low in the carbon intensity scale for electricity, but it could be somewhere else in this pathway as well. And then you can see hydrogen's another one that we talk about a lot, and one of the things we're going to evaluate. You can have some really low carbon intensity hydrogen. You can also have some really high carbon intensity hydrogen. And so what we have to do in the charge of this working group is to figure out what are all the technologies we're going to evaluate. And then as we think about the emissions from those technologies, what are the things we need to calculate and be considering as we look at the carbon intensity and other factors as we're evaluating this whole approach for the work we're doing. So with that, we're getting to where you all come in. So we started here as listing some of the pathways that we are aware of for alternative fuels. So these are the kind of the world of alternative fuels that we're aware of as being analyzed in other jurisdictions for heating fuels. And this is our starting point. And we're going to share in a minute our feedback form for this. So we've actually put this in there so you can reference it afterwards really easily in addition to seeing the recording. But these are a bunch of different options. But we know that there might be others, and so we're looking for your input on what are the other technologies we should be accounting for, fuels, and then technologies we should be accounting for. And the technology side is the fuel cells, carbon capture, are the kind of two main ones we know we want to get into in the same process. But again, open for input on others we should be considering. And as I said before, like a critical component of this working group is input and feedback from you all on what we should be doing. And so I think we're going to drop that form in the chat. And if you've got any input you want to provide on these different technologies and fuels, please go ahead and fill that form out in the next week or two, because we're going to be using that to prep for the next working group. So that we make sure we're hitting on all the different ones that folks want to talk about. And we'll be parsing through this over time. However, before we get into the discussion of considerations, because there's, we also want to hear feedback from everybody. What are other considerations in this whole process that we want to do? And there's space in that form to do so. But before we dive into that, I want to also, we've just covered a whole lot of material in the last 30 plus minutes. So I want to get us into some Q&A for general questions about where we stand. And then I just saw the person raise their hand. We'll do the hand raise if you've got a Q&A question right now, generally, put it in the Q&A function. It'll just allow us to sort through and save that. And then we'll open up to broad discussion at the end with the hand raised next. So this is general questions. If you've got a question about clean heat or BEPS, like how does it work, or what's some like specific, more mechanical things, we'll get to the feedback and discussion about, about these fuels and things here shortly after we get through a little bit of Q&A. Want to make sure we're all on the same playing field to start with.
Thanks for that, Zach. All right, like Zach was just saying, let's dive into some general Q&A that we've received throughout those presentations. So again, if you've got some questions regarding the content we just presented and not necessarily regarding the discussion portion Zach was just talking about, Q&A feature, bottom right-hand corner of the screen, circle, triangle, square, look for that button. Click on that, you'll see Q&A. You can submit your questions in there. We'll plan to devote, split up the remaining part of the session to address any of these Q&A questions, and then we'll move into discussion. But all right, cool. It seems like that's working. People are funneling things in. Great. So again, circle, triangle, square. Submit some thoughts on that content there, and we'll start reading through. Okay, so I think first question that we're getting here, sorry, it just takes me a second to get organized. I think this is a good one for you, Dr. Decarb. How should waste oil be treated in BEPS?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's why we're here today. And so right now in BEPS, Portfolio Manager is the benchmarking tool we use. And in Portfolio Manager, it calculates direct emissions based on fuel combustion. So waste oil is oil, and biodiesel is diesel. And when you put that into Portfolio Manager, it'll calculate the direct emissions associated with that. And so that's the whole reason we're here on the BEPS side to have this discussion, is that we've been tasked by the legislature to consider alternative fuels and biofuels in BEPS. And so we're here having this conversation to understand this way of considering it. This is outside of the normal process in Portfolio Manager. Today, you can't you can't put in a biofuel in Portfolio Manager. And so that's the whole point of this working group, is to have this discussion and get all this input and feedback on the types of fuels that you think should be considered and why, and any documentation to support why this should be considered for life cycle emissions analysis in this program.
All right, thank you, Zach, and thank you for that great question. All right, moving right along. All right, got another one for you, Zach, when you're ready. So someone commented regarding for BEPS, they were surprised to hear that a third of the covered building stock might already be in compliance with that final standard of net zero, and they were wondering if that modeling is available. Do you think you could highlight that?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, at the core, the BEPS as it is right now is all about net direct emissions. And just like we were saying, that heat pumps are some of the best-selling heating equipment in Maryland, and we know already today that just in general, zero emissions equipment, especially for space conditioning, is actually the majority of the equipment used for space conditioning in the state. So a lot of buildings are actually already zero emissions. And so that's how on the BEPS side, a bunch of those buildings are already there. And that modeling, that's all in our technical support documentation for the BEPS regulation. We've got kind of two stages of that, the 2024 and the 2023, all available on the department's website. So that is up there. But again, we're making good progress already, and we're now trying to look at how do we get from 1/3 to that 90% building sector reduction by 2045.
Thanks, Zach. And thanks for whomever asked that question. Just regarding what Zach just mentioned, that technical support documentation, I just dropped a link in the chat for where you can find the entire package for the BEPS that was proposed and finalized. And previous proposals and those technical packages can be found in the bottom of the BEPS website, which Cameron dropped the link to earlier, mde.maryland.gov/BEPS. So there's a lot of material to read through there, but if you can't find something, feel free to reach out to us. All right, moving right along. I think I can take one here. Someone asked about wondering about high schools and are they exempted from BEPS? And so I'll take that one. That yes, public. The wording is public and non-public secondary and elementary schools, and so K through 12 schools are eligible for exemption, total exemption from the BEPS program. As I said, when I was reading through that exemption graphic earlier on, these exempt property types do need to submit the application for exemption. But yes, K through 12 schools are eligible for that. And thank you for that question. And moving right along, appreciate everyone submitting your questions. We're going to take just a few more minutes here, I think, for the Q&A portion. And but the good thing is we'll catalog all the questions that are submitted, and as we do with other working groups, if we can't get to them today, we'll work to address them in future sessions. But appreciate you all submitting your thoughts here. So I think this one would be good for Zach, if you're ready. Does electrified district energy delivering heat play into the proposed clean heat standard?
Yeah, this is a great question. So the whole point of clean heat is that we're looking for, in this case, the system you'd install. In that case, you'd install something to reduce the emissions of generating steam, ultimately used for, or steam or hot water, ultimately used for heating in a building. And so those emissions reductions are creditable under clean heat. And that's some of these are very explicitly spelled out, and some of them are still to be spelled out. And as we look at the clean heat program and its development, kind of more one-off projects would have a way to do the math and use some of this life cycle emissions numbers if necessary to help support, if that's a specific one, or more specifically to the project, showing that it is kind of displacing an alternative system that would be providing heat through fossil fuels and thus emissions, and so it could generate credit. And so the short answer is yes.
All right. Thank you, Zach, and thanks for that question. I think maybe take another minute, do one more, and try and transfer over to discussion-based, based on the alternative fuels. I think here's another one for you, Zach. Is ZHES only for residential, or is it also for commercial equipment?
Yeah, great question. We didn't put it up because we're kind of doing a lot of feedback and thinking right now. But the ZHES rule, it came from a model rule developed by a coalition of states and a organization, a bunch of different states thinking about this. And so we have this model rule that kind of lays out how it goes, and now we're in the process of thinking about how to adapt that here in Maryland. And so the big kind of, it is set on equipment sizes. So in general, it's up to about 200 kBTU per hour is the equipment size generally covered under ZHES as proposed in the model rule. And you can find out more details about the model rule on our website, on the Clean Heat website. But at a high level, that's up to 200 kBTU per hour is the kind of most of, or thereabouts is the threshold for heat input from covered equipment under ZHES. So that's generally residential and small commercial. It is not necessarily on size of building or anything like that. And that's a point where there could be a large building using small equipment, but in general, it's intended, and the majority of the equipment that we're looking at for all of this is would be in the residential space.
All right. Thank you for that, Zach, and thanks for that great question and clarification. So with that, I think let's pause Q&A for general questions and move into some discussion. Sorry if we were unable to get to your Q&A submission. Again, we'll have a log of those, and we'll keep track of them, make sure we get into them into future sessions. So thanks for those submissions. And it looks like the hand raise feature is working, so glad to see that. That is how this next part is going to work. So let's we're going to call on folks as in the order that you raised your hands, and hopefully you should be able to unmute yourselves and give us your thoughts. Again, try and keep your thoughts to 2 minutes, and just being cognizant of time and for other folks. And if you're not comfortable coming off mute, sharing your thoughts, again, we have that feedback form. Feel free to give us your thoughts in there as well. And So just to tee up some conversation, there's some questions on the screen to think about. So, based off Zach's discussion and that list of alternative fuels he showed, what other technologies do you think should be considered? What should MDE consider as we evaluate these technologies? And what supporting documentation can you share? And just referencing that supporting documentation, there's going to be a process for submitting that to us via an email, but you'll read about that in the form. So without further ado, let's. I think Steve raised his hand first. Steve, can you try and come off mute and share your thoughts? I might have just sent you a request. Looks like it might have worked.
Okay, is it working now?
That's working,
Great.
Steve. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Just a quick question. I think this kind of comes under the second question, but first of all, I'm from Clean Fuels Alliance America. We represent the biomass-based diesel industry, and we're very supportive of the clean heat standard. I think your consultant said it was the biggest arrow in your quiver to decarbonize from the building sector, and we've been working with Vermont folks and Massachusetts folks who are also on a similar, at least Massachusetts, on a similar pathway. But my question is, and this is with regard to the zero emission heating equipment standards, is so we know that all of the major burner manufacturers have their burners certified for B100. And we also know that existing heating equipment, liquid fired heat equipment, can use low carbon liquid fuels with little or no changes. Is that going to be considered under that zero emission heating equipment standard at all? I hope that makes sense. I'm just not sure how these low carbon existing furnaces dovetail with that particular part of the program.
Yeah, thanks for joining us here today, Steve. This is we've left the Q&A section and now we've moved into the feedback. And so I think what I'm hearing is your feedback is please consider how these would be included under ZHES. So thank you for your comment. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Steve. And I think Maria's next up. So Maria, let me send you a request there. You should be able to unmute and share your thoughts whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Yes, mine goes kind of under what we should consider. We're dealing with a situation currently right now in Wycomico County. I am with a group, that environmental group that deals with a lot of help with environmental justice and various different assets to a community regarding clean air, clean water. We have right now an air permit that was given with no public notice at all to any of the 5 neighbors within 200 feet or within the community in general. The gentleman actually applied for an ag storage building while he was holding an air permit to build a biorefinery plant in the middle of a neighborhood. And I appreciate that Dr. Zach was talking about the emissions and the problems. We have people next door that are second-time cancer survivors. We have veterans that have asbestosis. We have somebody with a double lung transplant, and they're all on water wells in a protected area, which is supposed to be protected by zoning code, the Paleo Channel. The gentleman evaded all kinds of permits that he would have been required for had he not have lied to the county. So in other words, there are no industrial building codes that have been followed. Nothing. He evaded like 10 or 20 permits and inspections. There is a drain in the building. This would have all not have happened if there would have been notice going out on the air permits, at least coordination with the local government. They would have understood that, this gentleman was lying. So now we have a community that is not rich in funds that is trying to deal with this. And like my thinking is this could have been dealt with way before it got to this point.
Well, Maria, thanks for joining us today, and thank you for your feedback around air permits and coordinating with the county and the health impacts.
Thank you, Maria. And moving along to the next person with their hand raised, Susan Corey. I'm going to send you a request here. Hopefully you get it. And you should be able to come off mute.
And really quickly, while Sam's doing that, again, thank you to everybody speaking up today. We're taking notes, but if we encourage you as well, if there's additional documents or anything else you want to share with us, please do so in that feedback request form so that we have any other information you want to share with us that we can kind of take that into account as we move forward. Thanks again for being here. All right, Susan, sorry to interrupt you.
Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
With regard to alternative fuels, would MDE be open to providing an acceptable methodology for the life cycle analysis of emissions? I'm asking because there doesn't seem to be a standard methodology for some of these alternative fuels related to animal waste projects, to landfill gas projects, where maybe not so much landfill gas projects, but certainly for animal waste or any other organic waste, where the feedstock may not be consistent over time. And how that carbon intensity calculation can be performed in such a way that's consistent, across all users, and really acceptable by MDE.
Thanks, Susan, for the feedback. What I'm hearing is a desire for kind of outside of the dedicated pathways that we might identify in this working group, a way to do this same analysis, potentially using GREET here. Kind of that's the baseline, but maybe an adjustment in the feedstock or specific details. Is that kind of the gist of what your feedback is?
Yes, just because there doesn't appear to be a standard acceptable methodology in those calculations.
Gotcha. Yeah. So part of the goal of GREET is methodology. The GREET methodology is kind of at least the way we're approaching it when we're thinking about coming up with a standard acceptable methodology is using GREET wherever possible. And that's kind of the approach. If you have concerns with how GREET would treat this, that is a different question that we could definitely consider as well. But the broad answer is yes. Definitely want to have that conversation.
Okay, and then the second part of my question is, will MDE evaluate these technologies based on location as well? If these were kind of virtual supplies that aren't directly connected to our local pipelines, would that be viewed differently versus if it were connected to our local pipelines?
So Susan, again, what I'm hearing, we're in the feedback moment. So what I'm hearing is around, whether that's delivered directly to a building or not directly delivered to a building. That kind of the question.
Right. Whether they were, virtual agreements or the actual physical delivery.
Yeah, I think that's a great topic for continued discussion in this group. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Appreciate your thoughts. And think we've got one more person signed up with their raise hand to chat for a minute. Jay Edelson, I'm going to send you a request here to unmute. Take your time whenever you're ready. It looks like you are off mute. Let me see. We're not able to hear you on our end, Jay.
Well, Jay, given both the time and the technical difficulties, yeah, feel free to put it in the Q&A, your feedback, but also I just at this point, I think I saw another hand come up as well, but we're really running out of time. So I'm just going to suggest you send us in that feedback form what you're going to say today, and hopefully in a future working group we can get you figured out with the technology to be able to chime in via voice.
Yeah, sorry about those difficulties, Jay. And Chris, I see you got your hand up. And if you wouldn't mind, like Zach just said, putting your thoughts in that feedback form, we'll work to discuss those in future sessions. But with that, yeah, we got about a minute left, and just wanted to set you guys up, you know, how we're thinking of for the second session. We are date is to be determined for session 2. We're looking at end of April, early May, and we're going to look at more into GREET, doing a deep dive into that tool, and again also reviewing feedback submitted via that form. So please use that form that Cameron put in the chat earlier and share your thoughts with us. But really appreciate everyone joining today for this first session of the Alternative Fuels and Technologies Working Group. Really great turnout and great questions and thoughts from everyone. So thanks again. And again, if you have any lingering questions from today, you can contact the Clean Heat Rules team via the contact info on the left side of the screen, and the BEPS team via the contact info on the right side of the screen. But thank you very much for attending, and stay tuned for updates on the posting of the recording and the timing of the second session. And we look forward to seeing you then. Hope you all have a nice rest of your day. Thanks so much.